Hello, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Candace, and here we break down the hard truths about Canada's economy, the stories behind the headlines that affect your wallet, your job, and your future. It's January 2026, and if you've been following the news, you'll know the headlines are screaming caution. There's a palpable sense of unease in the air, a feeling that the relative calm we experienced might just be the quiet before the storm. We managed to sidestep a full-blown, officially declared recession in 2025, a feat many celebrated. But now, the very experts who tracked that narrow escape are warning that 2026 could be the year the floor gives way, the year things truly crack under the pressure that's been building for so long. The national picture, as always, is complex. On the surface, our economy shows a certain resilience, a stubborn refusal to buckle completely. But that national average masks a deeply fractured reality. When you look closer, you see that different provinces are on vastly different paths, facing unique challenges and vulnerabilities. It's a tale of two, or even three or four, Canadas. Today, we're going to peel back that national veneer and look at the regional fault lines. We are counting down the 8 provinces that are most vulnerable to serious economic pain, what some might even term a localized collapse in critical areas like jobs, housing, and provincial budgets, if the global and national headwinds worsen significantly in 2026. This isn't speculation or fear-mongering. Our analysis is grounded in the latest forecasts and reports from some of the most respected financial institutions in the country and beyond. We've synthesized data from RBC, BMO, TD Economics, the International Credit Agency, Fitch Ratings, and global consultants like Deloitte, or Rangis. Their consensus points to specific areas of weakness that simply cannot be ignored. So let's dive in. I urge you to listen closely because if you live in one of the provinces on our list today, this isn't just an abstract economic discussion. This is a forecast that could directly impact your life, and you need to pay attention. We begin our countdown at number 8 with Manitoba. Now, on the surface, Manitoba's economy seems steady, even robust in certain sectors. It's often called the Keystone Province for its central location, but in 2026, that central position also makes it highly exposed to the shifting winds of international trade. The province's economic engine is finely tuned to exports, from agricultural products to manufactured goods. This reliance is its strength in good times, but it becomes a significant vulnerability when global demand falters or, more pointedly, when trade disputes escalate. The whispers of renewed protectionism from our southern neighbor are growing louder, and Manitoba is directly in the line of fire. The forecasts we've reviewed from institutions like the Conference Board of Canada point to a notable weakness in its projected GDP growth. It's not falling off a cliff, not yet, but the trajectory is concerningly flat at a time when we need to see momentum. A key area of concern is manufacturing. Think buses, aerospace components, and farm machinery. These are sectors that are not only capital-intensive, but also highly sensitive to tariffs and cross-border supply chain disruptions. If the trade climate sours further, particularly with the United States, Manitoba could see a significant slowdown, leading directly to job losses in factories and workshops across the province. So let me be clear, we are not predicting a full-scale economic collapse in Manitoba. That would be an overstatement. But it is on this list for a crucial reason. It's one of the first provinces likely to feel the squeeze. Think of it as the canary in the coal mine for central Canada. Its high trade exposure coupled with relatively tepid growth forecasts means that any negative shock to the system will be felt here quickly and acutely. It's a story of vulnerability, a province whose stability is more fragile than many of its residents might realize. Coming in at number 7 is British Columbia. For years, BC has been the envy of the nation, a province of stunning natural beauty and until recently, seemingly unstoppable economic growth fueled by real estate and global demand for its resources. But the shine has well and truly come off. The headwinds that began gathering in 2024 and 2025 are now hitting the West Coast with force. The province is grappling with a multi-front battle, and the foundations of its gilded economy are showing deep cracks. The forestry sector, a cornerstone of BC's identity and economy, has been battered by a combination of U.S. lumber tariffs, beetle infestations, and devastating wildfire seasons. The pain doesn't stop with lumber. The province's aluminum sector has also faced the sting of tariffs, creating uncertainty in communities that depend on smelters for high-paying jobs. But perhaps the most significant anchor weighing on BC's economy is its housing market. After years of defying gravity, the market is in a sustained recession. The sky-high prices that once fueled consumer spending through home equity lines of credit are now a massive liability. This housing downturn has a chilling effect that ripples through construction, retail, and financial services, sucking the oxygen out of the domestic economy. On top of all this, British Columbia carries a high level of both government and household debt. Fitch Ratings has specifically flagged the province's fiscal situation as one to watch. If these trade challenges persist and the housing downturn deepens, BC is at a very real risk of a complete economic stall. The combination of external trade pressures and internal domestic weakness is a potent, dangerous mix. The very things that made BC boom, housing and resources, are now the sources of its greatest vulnerability, and the path to recovery looks increasingly steep and uncertain. Our list now takes us to the heart of French Canada, to number 6, Quebec. Much like Manitoba, Quebec's economic fortunes are intrinsically linked to the flow of goods across borders. Its diverse manufacturing base, from aerospace in Montreal to aluminum in Saguenay, is heavily reliant on a stable and open trading relationship, especially with the United States. This trade exposure, which has been a pillar of its prosperity, is now its Achilles heel. As global demand cools and protectionist rhetoric heats up, the province's export-oriented industries are finding themselves in an increasingly precarious position. The economic data coming out of Quebec tells a story of lost momentum. BMO and TD economics have both highlighted the province's slow growth, which is trailing the already sluggish national average. This isn't a sudden crisis but a gradual erosion of economic vitality. The manufacturing sector in particular is showing signs of significant weakness. Orders are down, investment is hesitant, and the mood in boardrooms and on factory floors is one of anxious uncertainty. The fear is that this weakness is not a temporary blip, but the beginning of a more prolonged slump. The most direct and painful consequence of this trend is the risk of rising unemployment. For years, Quebec has made impressive strides in lowering its unemployment rate, but that progress is now under threat. If exports continue to decline, manufacturers will be forced to scale back production, and that inevitably means layoffs. For thousands of families across the province, this isn't just a line on an economist's chart. It's the potential loss of a livelihood. Quebec's challenge in 2026 is to navigate these powerful external headwinds without letting its domestic economy slide backward into a period of job losses and stagnation. At number 5, we arrive at the nation's economic engine, Ontario. For decades, the saying has been, as Ontario goes, so goes Canada. But in 2026, that engine is sputtering badly. The province is experiencing some of the most sluggish growth in the entire country. A shocking state of affairs for a region that accounts for nearly 40% of the national economy. The reasons are complex, but they begin and end with the province's deep integration with the U.S. market, and its reliance on industries that are ground zero in the current trade battles. The impact of tariffs, both real and threatened, has been a body blow to Ontario's manufacturing heartland. The auto sector, the jewel in Ontario's industrial crown, is facing immense pressure. Any disruption from the ongoing intense CUSMA, the new NAFTA negotiations, could be catastrophic, potentially leading to plant closures and the loss of tens of thousands of high-paying jobs in communities from Windsor to Oshawa. It's a similar story for the steel industry in places like Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie, which have been on a roller coaster of uncertainty for years. Add to this a housing market that remains subdued, and you have a recipe for profound economic malaise. The worst-case scenario for Ontario is stark. If the CUSMA talks fail, or if the U.S. economy tips into a deeper recession, Ontario could very well lead the country in job losses. This isn't just about one or two sectors, it's about the entire ecosystem that supports them. From parts suppliers and logistics companies to local restaurants and shops in factory towns, the ripple effect would be immense. The province, that once powered Canada's growth, is now one of its most significant liabilities, facing a genuine risk of a sharp and painful contraction. We now head to the East Coast, where at number 4, we find New Brunswick. The province's economy has long been characterized as fragile, a delicate balance of traditional industries and efforts to modernize. That fragility is being put to the test in 2026. New Brunswick's proximity and deep economic ties to the United States, particularly the New England states, make it exceptionally vulnerable to any downturn south of the border. A significant portion of its GDP is derived from exports, ranging from seafood and forestry products to refined petroleum. When U.S. consumers and businesses tighten their belts, the drop in demand is felt almost immediately in New Brunswick's ports, mills, and refineries. It's a direct and unforgiving transmission mechanism. The Conference Board of Canada has been clear in its forecasts. A slowdown in U.S. demand represents the single greatest risk to the province's economic outlook. This isn't a theoretical danger. It's a clear and present one that threatens the core of New Brunswick's industrial base and the jobs that depend on it. The consequence of this exposure is a heightened risk of rising unemployment and renewed fiscal pressure on the provincial government. For a province that has fought hard to manage its finances and create employment opportunities, a significant economic headwind could unwind years of progress. A drop in tax revenues combined with an increased demand for social services would put immense strain on the provincial budget, limiting its ability to respond to the crisis. New Brunswick's story in 2026 is one of external vulnerability, a province whose fate is tied closely to the economic health of its powerful neighbor. Continuing our journey eastward, we land at number 3 with Nova Scotia. In recent years, Nova Scotia has been a bright spot in Atlantic Canada, attracting new residents and investment, and posting growth that often outpaced its neighbors. There's been a sense of optimism, a feeling that the province had finally turned a corner. However, that momentum is now facing a serious test. While the growth has been welcome, it has been modest by national standards, and the foundations of that growth are now looking less secure. One of the key buffers for Nova Scotia's economy has been the steady, reliable presence of the defense sector, particularly the Halifax shipyard, and its work on the federal shipbuilding strategy. This provides a level of stability that other provinces envy. However, that major project cannot insulate the entire economy from a broader downturn. The province remains highly vulnerable to a slowdown in consumer spending. The recent population boom, while positive, also means there are more people whose confidence can be shaken, more households that might pull back on spending if job security feels threatened. Furthermore, a key risk highlighted by economists is a potential slowdown in that very population growth. If the economic opportunities that drew people to Nova Scotia begin to dry up, the influx of new residents could slow or even reverse, putting a damper on the housing market and domestic demand. Nova Scotia isn't facing the same acute manufacturing risks as Central Canada, but its vulnerability is more subtle. It's the risk that the positive tide that lifted its fortunes in recent years simply goes out, leaving the province exposed to weaker consumer sentiment and a less dynamic domestic economy. At number 2, we find Canada's smallest province, Prince Edward Island. In economics, as in physics, size matters. For Prince Edward Island, its small scale amplifies every risk. The very factors that make the island a unique and wonderful place to live also make its economy exceptionally susceptible to shocks. The growth it has experienced has been heavily reliant on a few key drivers: tourism, agriculture, and a significant public sector. When those drivers slow down, there are few other industries large enough to pick up the slack. The forecasts for 2026 point to a significant deceleration. A key factor is an anticipated slowdown in public sector spending and investment. The government is a major employer and economic driver on the island, and as fiscal pressures mount, that stimulus is expected to wane. This couldn't come at a worse time. Add to that the burden of high household and government debt relative to the size of its economy, and the picture becomes more concerning. For many islanders, the dream of homeownership has been financed by debt, making the population highly sensitive to interest rate hikes and economic uncertainty. The potential for a sharp economic slowdown is very real. What might be a moderate downturn in a larger, more diversified province could feel much more like a recession or even a crisis on Prince Edward Island. A bad tourism season, a poor potato harvest, or a cutback in government hiring can have an outsized impact that ripples through the entire community. The island's charm is its close-knit nature, but its economic vulnerability is its lack of insulation from these concentrated risks. The outlook for 2026 suggests a difficult year ahead, where the island's economic isolation could become a significant liability. And that brings us to number 1. In a way, it's a tie, but it's really about one single massive risk zone: Central Canada. The most vulnerable provinces, the weakest links in the Canadian economic chain for 2026, are Ontario and Quebec. We've already touched on them individually, but it is crucial to understand that their fates are intertwined, and their combined weakness poses the single greatest threat to the national economy. If a serious downturn is coming, the consensus among nearly every major financial institution is that this is where it will hit first and hardest. Multiple sources, from RBC and BMO to the international credit agencies, are flagging Ontario and Quebec as the regions with the most exposure and the least momentum. Why? It comes down to a toxic cocktail of factors. First and foremost is their overwhelming dependence on manufacturing and trade, with a potentially slowing and increasingly protectionist United States. The auto sector in Ontario and the aerospace and aluminum sectors in Quebec are the jugular veins of the Canadian economy. Any significant disruption here doesn't just cause localized pain, it causes a national hemorrhage. In a worst-case scenario for 2026, these two provinces could experience a rapid rise in unemployment, potentially reaching levels not seen in over a decade. This would trigger a collapse in consumer spending and confidence, which would then cripple the service and retail sectors. The housing markets in Toronto and Montreal, already fragile, could see a much deeper correction. Because these two provinces account for over half of Canada's population and economic output, their slump would inevitably drag the entire country down with them, ensuring a slow, painful, and difficult recovery for all of Canada. They are, without question, on the brink. So, there you have it. From the prairies of Manitoba to the industrial heartland of Ontario and Quebec, the fault lines in Canada's economy are becoming clearer. This isn't a prediction of doom, but it is a serious wake-up call. The economic resilience we've taken for granted is being tested. And, for these 8 provinces, the margin for error in 2026 is razor-thin. The coming year will demand careful navigation from our leaders, resilience from our industries, and a clear-eyed understanding of the risks from all of us. The story is still being written, and how we respond to these challenges will define our economic future. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think of this forecast? Which province are you in, and are you already starting to feel the heat? Are you seeing signs of a slowdown in your community, in your workplace? The national conversation is often dominated by big-picture numbers, but the real story is always on the ground. Your experiences and observations are a vital part of understanding the full picture. Drop a comment below and let's have a real, honest conversation about what's happening across the country. If this breakdown gave you a new perspective or woke you up to the challenges ahead, please take a moment to smash that like button. It really helps the channel reach more Canadians who need to hear this message. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more real talk economic analysis that goes beyond the official talking points. We're in for a challenging time, there's no doubt about it. But remember this: stay strong, Canada. We are a resilient people and we have survived worse. We will get through this, together.